Hey, it's part 3 of the Holton restoration. Welcome to Hack-A-Week. So this tone hole is a bit of a problem. This guard can't be removed, and where it lines up is dead center with where I need to put the ball Allen, and it's too much of an angle. I can't actually spin it that way. It'll catch and distort and twist weird. So this one is just a test of patience. Basically, go nice and slow. And I've checked it already. It's high here and here. It's leaking light over on these edges. So if I just keep a little finger pressure on it like this. Now I'm just going to go over everything with a needle file with some 4-0 steel wool wrapped around it. Get into all little nooks and crannies and clean off any tarnish, leftover flux, stuff from when I was leveling out the tone holes. Get it all cleaned up. And then we're going to go give it a bath. Alright, with the accompaniment of my mockingbird friend overhead, I'm just going to dip this whole thing now in a bucket of detergent and a little bit of borax. Just let it soak a little bit. And I've got these big old bottle brushes that I got on Amazon. I found out about these from the Better Sax YouTube channel. Check that out. I'm just going to clean everything out really good. Give it a good scrub inside and out. Get all that old caked on schmutz out of there. The body's nice and clean, resting on the bench. Now we get to peel away all of the old glue. It's kind of like a plastic glue on this one. There's a little bit of shellac there too. Got to take that off from all the keys where the pads are going to go. I'm going to do that with my heat gun. And I think I've got it set on, looks like 450. There we go, that's one. Before I do any more work on these key cups, straightening them out, I need to get some of the tarnished silver off. I've got some tarnish remover here for jewelry. I'm just going to paint it on. It doesn't take very long. Not sure what the chemistry of this is, but it sure is stinky. There's other methods to do this. This is just real quick, easy. Does a pretty good job. Once it's all removed and it isn't black anymore, I just rinse it in some warm water. Got a bucket down here below the bench. There we go, tarnish free. Pretty much going to repeat that process for every single one of the key cups. 3.5 hours later, and we've got nice, shiny, all straightened out parts. Everything looks beautiful now, ready for pads. Now I'm removing all the springs. I want to get those all out of the way so I can give this a good cleaning and a little bit of polishing and not have those springs in the way to stab myself. I already did that a couple of times. It sure does sting. And there's nasty stuff on there. You can get an infection as well. Let me zoom in here and show you how I am doing this. We're going to remove this spring right here. There are tools you can buy to do this. They're not cheap. They range anywhere from $35 to $65 a piece, but here's the deal. I'm going to put some vice grips on there, and I'm going to take this other old crappy pair of pliers I got. What I'm going to do is just squeeze between the post and the pliers, and when I do, the spring pushes back. And I should be able to just kind of wiggle it and work it out. This one's got a little bend to it. when these go in, they get flattened on the end on an anvil, and that's what makes them wedge in there. So I need to measure the length of this one now and record that so that I keep track of it all later. I've got a photo I took and I labeled all of the pegs. That one is 29 millimeters and its diameter is 0.72. I'm going to call it 0.8. There's my photograph with all of the pegs numbered. I've got 3 different views going on, and then as I go, I record everything here. These are the set of needles that I have ordered. 8 of them at 0.8, 9 at 0.9, 3 at 1, 3 at 1.2, and then here I'm just writing them all down as I go. The next order of business is getting all the keycaps nice and flat and straight again. I've got a bench anvil that I'm working with and a little rawhide mallet. Just tap on these lightly all the way around, any place that they're a little high. Like right here it's a bit high. And that's about all it takes. I'm going to tap on the edge, not in the middle, and dent it. That's about all there is to it. That one's pretty flat now. Now that I've got all the key cups nice and flat and straight, we need to make sure they're going to line up on all of the tone holes. I'm going to start out with the neck and the octave key. Just put this together and see where things line up. I can already tell that the pip in relation to the guidepost is a little bit off. That may have been that way from the original assembly. Not too much I can do about that. But what I can do is just bend things a tiny bit to get things to line up right. This looks like it's a little twisted. So we can just take my Nipex slip joint parallel pliers. I love these things. I'm just going to grab that down here and we're going to give it just a little bit of a twist. Just enough where it looks centered up again instead of off to one side. And this up here is a little bit that way too much, and it is scraping against the guide. And even though this looks nice and straight, it does have to tweak over that way just a little. So I'm just going to grab it right here and give it just a gentle tweak. I may have to take it back off to do it the right way. That's better. Might put just a little more tension on that spring. Put a little more bend in it. Be careful I don't break it. I broke it. Well, okay, that's another part I've got to replace. That's alright. Let's place another order with Music Medic. I've already done about 3. No big deal. There are other springs on some of the smaller keys on this saxophone and all saxophones. I think what I'll do is go through and figure out just what I need and just order all of these springs as well. I've got all of the other springs here for the rest of the keys. The ones that look like this, the needles, the springs o' death as I like to call them. So I'll go through and figure out what I need to order for the leaf springs and we'll get some of those going. So this is what I'm looking for, is parallel to the tone hole when it's raised up a bit, about the thickness of what the pad would be. So I'm going to fit each key one or several at a time and make sure before I get to any kind of pad installation that they look like this, nice and parallel. Before everything goes back together, another thing to check is the play between the screw rods and the hinge barrels on all the keys. They get worn out over time. This is an old instrument. This is a 1925 instrument, so yeah, it's pretty old. So you can see there's a lot of play right there. I can wiggle this back and forth, and it's all right here at this point. Let's see if I can get you in nice and close to check this out. See that play that's in there? It wiggles around a bit. Well, we have swaging pliers. These are the Knipex parallel pliers, and I actually made these myself in my machine shop today just because I felt like it. I could have bought a pair from Music Medic for not much more than the cost of these, but I just felt like making my own just for fun. So the way these work is basically you're just squeezing this tube and making it a little bit tighter, because this was machined with the gap in the jaws, so that by the time I squeeze it together I've got a bit of an oval hole instead of perfectly round. So let's give that a try. So if I put this in there, I can just feel a little bit of play in it. And now I can just take my swaging pliers. I can squeeze, rotate, squeeze, rotate, squeeze. Move out a little bit, do that again, and let's see how much we tightened it up. There's not much play in this. This is pretty minimal, but because this is so long, it translates to quite a bit of movement. So that's already getting a little bit tighter. I'll work this just a little bit more. Feels pretty good on that end. Over here on this little shoulder, I can probably squeeze that just a little bit. It doesn't take much, kind of a light touch. I think that's good enough. So I'm going to check all the rest of the keys and make sure that none of them have a huge amount of play. A little bit is to be expected on an instrument this old, but I'll do what I can to get it all out. I'm going to start putting shellac on the pads. I've got a hot air gun here. I'm going to warm up the shellac and basically just paint the entire back of this pad with shellac until I cover all of it. So that's pretty good coverage there. Now when I put it into the cup, it's going to squish out toward the edges. So now I'm going to just take my heat gun and from a distance warm this a bit just to melt it. Let it flow out a little. And then what I'm going to do is press it down onto my bench anvil, which is a really cold piece of steel. And what it's going to do is flatten it all out for me. And it'll be ready to set into a key cup. I can just take the bench anvil, flip it over, press it into it, and there it is, with all of that material evenly dispersed. Well, I made it through almost all of my pads putting shellac on, and I ran out. I've got some ordered, but I did receive today my little teeny flat springs, so I can go ahead and put those on. So the one I broke was on my octave key. I'm going to take this apart. There's just a little screw here that holds it in place. I'm going to get that out. These springs come flat, so I need to actually bend a tiny bit of an arc into them. Right, so let's see how this is going to work out just with my flat pliers. What kind of a bend I can put in these and how resilient that bend is going to stay. There we go. Now let's tighten that up, and I can already see I've got to put more of a bend in it than what it has now, so let's just see what we can do with my fingers. So the spring's on there. You can see it's a little bit longer than it needs to be, it hits in the land there just fine, and it's got plenty of spring tension. I might as well just cut off that excess. So it looks like I need to cut off about 4 or 5 millimeters. Run the screw in until it just kind of gets flush with the post. There we go. Look at that. All set. I've got shellac on all the pads. I have not put the springs on yet, but I just want to check out how well this is going to work. This is synthetic shellac that I got from Music Medic. I think the first one I'm going to put on is on the neck octave key. So I'm just going to set it in place right there, roughly. And then I'm going to turn on my heat gun, and I'm going to warm the cup, the pad cup. I'm just going to warm up the cup and let this settle into place. Let it melt the shellac, synthetic shellac. And once it gets up to temperature, just going to give it a little push like that. And I can see a bit of it oozing out the side there. I'm going to let that go just like that and call it done. Time to do the springs. Before I put any keys on, I've got to have the springs back in place. I've got all of my springs over here, ranging in size from 0.6 millimeter all the way up to 1.4 millimeter. Ahead of time, I wrote down all of the diameters and sizes of all my springs and numbered them on a photograph I took as I pulled them out. Measured the length, measured the diameter. So let's start out with, let's check out the very first one, the one I call number 1, which is right here, and it is a 1.4 millimeter diameter spring. Goes right in that area, and we need to measure out, its length is 47 millimeters, so I'm going to get out the caliper here, and let's measure from the pointy end, 47 millimeters. See, right about there. And then what I'm going to do is just hold it up here and right there is 47. I'm going to take the side cutters and put just a little notch there so that I know where to cut it. That measurement one more time. It's a little longer than it needs to be, so let's go back just a little on it, right about there. Okay, now I need to anneal this area with the torch because I'm going to pound it flat. So what I'm going to do is fire up the torch. And I'm going to remove the bluing. That's what I'm after, is making the blue part look silver again. See how it looks a little different colored right there? I'm going to take that all the way up to where I need to do the cut. And maybe just a little bit past it. And now I can cut it off at that length. And now that it's cut, I need to pound this end flat. Now I'm going to hammer this flat on the end for probably about 4 or 5 millimeters. I want it to be totally flattened out so that it will catch in the hole that it goes through. This is a 1.4 millimeter diameter spring, so I'm going to flatten it out so that it's maybe like 1.6 or 1.8. Then when I push it into that hole, it will wedge it into place. Flip it over. That should do it. I made these pliers just for this job. They have a slot in them right here, and then a little bit of a rounded section I ground into them on the other end. And the way these work is like this. We'll put the spring in, push it in to the point where it's just bumping onto that part that I hammered. The slot end is going to go on this side. So just kind of put it on either side of the spring. First I need to take out this pin. Okay, that's out of the way. So now I'll put it in there and straddle that side, and then I'm just going to squeeze. Push that spring in until it seats. I can already see that it's not quite pounded flat enough, so I'm going to make it just a little wider. I flattened it just a little bit wider. Maybe now you can see it a bit better. I'm giving you more of an overhead shot here of what's going on. So now I'm just going to squeeze this into that hole until it bottoms out. It should fit good and tight, and indeed it does. Now I can check where it's all going to line up, and it lines up perfect right on the saddle where that little boss is that's going to make this go closed. So there we go, that's one. I have 22 springs to do total. Now that I have all the springs on, the next step is to reinstall all of the keys. But before I do that, I need to re-cork everything on the bottoms of some of the keys. There are places where there needs to be cork. Any place where metal touches metal, basically. There are some keys you push that then actuate other keys, and there are places like this that have cork on them, and that all needs to be replaced. I've scraped off all the old stuff. The thickness of them does vary depending on where they go. Most of the time a key like this will have a thick piece of cork. I've got one here that still has the original cork on it. You can see it right there. And I'm probably gonna just leave that one alone because it's original. Be kind of nice to have an original piece. Original as far as the last time this was worked on by a tech. Who knows when that was. But anyway, I need to redo all of the corks. So here we go. So I've got contact cement here ready to go. That's what we're going to use to put this all on with. And there's a couple of ways to do this. I've seen videos where people paint the contact cement on ahead of time, let it dry, then warm it up just a little bit and press the cork into place. I suppose you could do it that way. You could also put some on here, some on the cork, then press it into place, and then you need to trim it. So first I need to cut a piece for this. I'm going to use the 2.6 millimeter size, and I'm just going to cut a section a little bigger than what I need. Okay, a little cement on the key. Don't need much, just a thin layer, and then we'll put some cork. We're just going to leave that to dry for a few minutes till it gets tacky. Now that it's dried a bit, we're just going to press this into place, making sure that we get it all the way to the end. Squeeze. And that's it. That's stuck on there. We'll let it sit, cure up for a minute or two, and we'll come back and trim it with a nice bevel all the way around. Well, I've got the left hand keys partway installed. All of the corking is done on this side of the saxophone. I've still got to do the right hand keys, the corking on that, but I've got most of this installed, still working on some of it. And it is pretty tricky getting all this stuff lined back up properly. It's definitely got to go on in our proper order. Well, after an 8-hour day of work, here we are. All the keys are installed. The corking is all done. There's an initial adjustment on all of the springs, which was a bit tricky here and there. Some of the springs have to balance with other springs because you're opposing other springs when you press certain keys, so they need to balance out properly. But it's all put back together and it's ready to receive pads. This is all my pads arranged by size, starting at 10 millimeter going all the way up to 45. And then I've got my chart over here with the picture of the pad and then the size of the pad all the way through all of them, all 26 of them. Number one is this one right here, and that's what we're going to get started with. So now what I'm going to do is take my homemade pin vise here and grab the pad with that little pin, and this is going to be a bit tricky doing this so that you can watch it on camera, but this is how we are going to do it. It goes in there like that, and that pad is really thick looking, but I think it's going to work okay. Okay, now that I've got it there, I'm going to apply some heat. Not with a torch, but with this heat gun, and just get it on the key cup only and just let the spring pressure do the rest. Now what's going to happen is you'll see it's right now settling a bit, and then I'm just going to give it a little push right here. You can see some of the shellac squishing out from around the side there. Now we're going to get off from it and let it cool off. There it is, all cooled off. And what I'll do is check it now with the leak light and make sure it is indeed seated nice and even all the way around, and then I can come back and clean things up a little bit. After a bit of adjustment, let's take a look at our number one pad again. That looks pretty good. I think we're sealed up, and of course as it sits there and seats in, it'll seal a little better. So that's what I got to do to all the pads. I am not going to take you through every single one, obviously, because that would eat up so much video time. So we're going to move ahead to where they're all done. All the pads are installed. That took about 4 hours, a little more than that maybe, but they are all on there, and all the corking is tweaked a bit so nothing makes noise. That one used to make noise. A couple of these used to make noise. I had to go back and do a few over again, but essentially that's it. It is all padded up with no leaks. Use the leak light to check all that out. So we're almost done. Now it's time to cork the neck. Okay, I've got my piece of 1/16 cork here, or actually it's 1.5 millimeter. This is 1 3/4 inches by 2 3/4 inches. That's about 43 by 70 millimeters. And the first thing I need to do is cut a tapered edge on this. So I'm going to lay it up here on the wood block, and I'm going to just go for about a 45-degree angle here with my razor knife and carefully cut across here. It's a little tricky. This is the tech cork too. This is not regular cork, and I'm not sure how it's going to work out, but I'm going to use it anyway and see how it does. This tech cork does not behave like regular cork, and I'm a little rough there, but I'm going to go with it anyway. I've got the neck taped off at about the length that this is going to be, so this is all cleaned up too. That's important. Already did that. And get some contact cement on here, paint it right up to the end and right up to the tape. Now I'll put some contact cement on my piece of cork, and I'm going to do it on the side away from that bevel that I cut. Make sure we get a nice even coat, and I'm going to let this sit and dry for about 5 or 8 minutes, something like that. Okay, this is dried to the point of being tacky, bevel side up, And I'm going to put this on here and start wrapping. It's going to tend to wrap a little different because of the taper. So I'm going to let a little bit of it stick out past the end here. I'm going to tack down just that part. And now what I'm going to do is put a little bit of contact cement on this beveled portion. Maybe even a little past it, and I'm going to let that dry for about 5 minutes. That's dried down. Now we're ready to start wrapping. So I'm just going to start working my way around a little at a time and kind of roll as you go, sort of a thing. Now, if this was regular cork, I would have pounded on it with a hammer first to actually soften it up a bit so that it didn't crack while wrapping it. Okay, now that it's on there, I'm going to just take one of my tools here that's something nice and round and just roll it across here really good to make sure that the cork is well bonded to the neck. Now right here where the bevel is, right about there, what I need to do is slice the cork away. We're going to sand this too, but for right now I'm just going to do a kind of a beveled cut. Be sure I don't cut deep into the cork. If I do, I'll have to start all over again. Now we're ready to sand it. I've got a piece of aluminum rod here that should suffice. A piece of 100 grit sandpaper. I'm just going to push up against this to hold it in place and start sanding on it. This Tech cork does sand a bit different than regular natural cork. Okay, that's at a point where I think we're ready to try fitting a mouthpiece. This is a vintage Holton mouthpiece that I bought separately from the saxophone purchase, and I can already tell that that still needs a bunch more sanding, so we're just going to keep at it here. Mostly at this end, so I'm going to fold this in half and concentrate mostly on that end portion. Let's see what we got now. We're getting close. So I'm just going to keep sanding until I get this to the point where the mouthpiece will slide on. Okay, it's at the point now where the mouthpiece will slide on. I might have sanded it a bit too thin, but you know what, I can always do it again, but we'll see how that works out. So now I'm just going to trim this evenly to the tape line, peel the tape off. And that's that. Definitely a little too thin, but I'm anxious to try out this horn, so I'm going to go ahead and put a reed in here and see what we get. Well, let's give it a blow with the one song I do know, Coming Home Baby, Urban Man. Sounds pretty good. It's a lot warmer. Oh, it's a beautiful tone. It's a lot warmer sounding than the Bundy 2 is. This mouthpiece is pretty cool. I want to redo the cork on the neck, but it's good enough for now. Everything seems to be working okay. The octave key does its job like it's supposed to. That was pretty tricky to get worked out because there's a balance between the octave key and I believe it's the C key when you press it. Because then what happens is it closes this one, opens this one on the body, etc. But there's a lot of things that need to be in balance. It'll probably take a little bit of tweaking here and there to get things feeling right, but for right now it plays pretty darn good for just fresh off the bench. What a journey to get here though. Wow. I'm into this thing now. What time is it today? 6:44. Yeah, I've got about I'm at about 50 hours right now invested in this, not counting some of the side things I did like ordering parts, making tools, etc. So probably a good 60 hours of work to bring this thing back to a nice playable instrument again. It is a beautiful vintage instrument from 1925. It plays great. There you have it. A fully restored alto saxophone made by Holton. I love Holton instruments. Some people don't really like Holton saxophones. They say they're not worth restoring, but I like them. And I like the silver plate because you don't have to worry about any tarnishing, at least minimal. If you keep them in the case, they can stay looking just like this for a long time. No lacquer to chip off or anything. It plays great, it sounds great. The vintage mouthpiece seems to work the best with it, so that's what I'm playing with it here now. So anyway, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and watch for other saxophone videos coming up. I've got a couple other ones I've got in the works restoring, and those will be coming up soon. Till next time.